Hello and welcome back to another lesson from English with Greg. Now, I've been teaching English for more than 15 years now, and in that time, so many students have come to me to ask me how they can speak like a native in English job interviews. If that is you, you will know that you want to increase your fluency, you want to expand your vocabulary, you want to just take your English to the highest level possible in a short space of time so that you can give a winning, confident job interview in English. So today I have brought a friend in to talk about this with me. His name is James. He's been teaching with my academy for many years now and loves preparing students for job interviews in English. So much, in fact, that he has written a book about it. Yes, he has a new book which has just been released called Interview in English. So I thought, what a great opportunity to have James on the channel to help you give a confident job interview in English. I'm looking forward to this, so let's go. Hello, James. How are you?
Hi, Greg. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us and helping us, well, helping our students learn a little bit about how to prepare a confident job interview in English. Tell us a little bit about yourself, James, for people who don't know who you are.
Of course. So, my name is James, and I am a teacher with Online Language Academy. But I also coach non native English speakers to advance their careers in the international English speaking workplace. So, I have some clients who, come from Brazil but work for Amazon, or come from Korea but work for, international companies where they need to use English every day.
Excellent. All right, and you have written a book about it, I believe.
Yeah, so I recently published my book, Interview in English. I wanted to make it very easy to find. And it brings non native English speakers through the process of the English interview and how to answer some of the most common questions, how to prepare yourself properly for this interview, and I hope that it will give people a lot of confidence, not only when they already have the interview, but also to seek out those opportunities. Because that's half the battle, right? Half the battle is just saying, you know what, I will apply for that company.
Excellent. Right. You kindly sent me a copy of the book, which I read. And I wanted to start the interview by just looking at one little quote that I loved from the book. The quote was, "The problem is not your English, it's your confidence to express yourself in English." Now, could you explain that quote a little bit? Explain what you mean with that for our viewers.
Of course. So you know this, I know this, right? A lot of clients will come to us and they'll tell us, "Oh, I just feel so, I just don't have any confidence when I need to speak English. Oh, I feel like my English is so bad." And they're talking to us in great English, right? A lot of people, they focus so much on how they're saying, on the grammar and the sentence structure, that they forget to focus on what they're saying, on the message of what they want to express. So basically, people who have interviews in international companies, they have the English ability, right? They're not lacking any level to give this interview. Instead, they lack that confidence to go to that interview and stop thinking about their English and those small mistakes and really to focus on their message. And that's what I'm hoping this book will help people to realize, and will help people to build that confidence to express their abilities, to express their value in an interview.
Right, yeah, because I mean, a lot of students who we prepare for job interviews, they worry about their English grammar, they worry about their lack of vocabulary, all these sort of things, their pronunciation. I mean, they worry about everything, and usually they want to prepare an interview that they have in 2 weeks' time, and they think, okay, I've got 2 weeks to get my English level from here to here in order to get the job, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, they already have the English level, right? And so when you're preparing for the interview, we need to stop focusing on, oh, did I use the right verb tense? Or, oh, is this the right vocabulary word? And start focusing on, what you want to express, what you want to show about your personality.
Yeah.
And that's how you're going to really prepare for that job interview.
So what do you suggest, like if you are in a job interview situation and you make a mistake? I mean, maybe it's natural to worry about your grammar and worry about your English. And if you make a grammatical mistake or a mistake in pronunciation or if you use the wrong word, you think, oh no, yeah. I mean, what do you suggest doing in that situation? Should you go back and correct yourself so that the interviewer knows that your English is at the level that you think you have, or just let it go?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, right? It's difficult to let it go, right? But I think in most cases we should kind of move on. Native speakers, we make grammar errors all the time, right? When we're having a conversation, we make these errors, but we're not thinking about it. We're not thinking about the mistakes we make because we know that our message is clear. And that's what these non-native speakers need to start to realize. The message is what's important. The grammar is not. Now, if you do notice a grammar error and are able to correct it in the moment, I think that's a good thing to do. If you say, well, I think myself as, oh, sorry, I think of myself as, if you can do it immediately after you make the mistake, by all means. If you already continue, don't go back because that's just going to show that you have that insecurity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's better to just continue and just maintain a confident presence, despite the fact that you made a small grammatical error that nobody cares about, really. Right.
Exactly. And if you move on and you continue, then the interviewer is not going to focus on that grammatical error. What people need to remember is you're not in the second interview, in the first interview, you're not being judged on your English ability. You're being judged for your ability to do the job that they're hiring for.
Excellent. So, with that in mind, a lot of students, when they're preparing a job interview in English, they will look at the most common questions. Tell us about yourself. Tell me about your strengths, your weaknesses, your past experience, blah, blah, blah. Uh, is it a good idea, if the message is so important, is it a good idea to write down what you want to say, the message that you want to convey, and like almost memorize that? Is that a good thing to do, or would you advise against doing that?
Yeah, that's a really great question because it's one of our first reactions when we're preparing for an interview. We like to think, okay, I'm going to write exactly what I want to say in the interview. And I would absolutely say that that is not what you want to do, right? Instead, and you kind of mentioned it, I think it's better to prepare kind of talking points. So this is what I offer in my book, right? I have a whole section about rehearsing, writing a script and repeating that same thing over and over versus practicing, which is decide your theme, decide your answers, but don't write out every word. And I think this is really important because an interview is a conversation. It's not a test. It's not a series of question, answer, question, answer. We can try to predict the most common questions, but interviews, interviewers will add different questions based on your answers. They want to get to know your personality. Some interviewers ask questions that you couldn't possibly prepare for that very reason, right? So if we have a script in our mind, it's very easy to kind of forget what we wanted to say, or we sound rehearsed. And this is just going to damage our opportunity to show our personality in a job interview. So think about what you want to say, but don't write exactly what you plan to say.
Right. So as you say, James, it's a conversation. It's not question answer, question answer. It's a natural conversation between the interviewer and the interviewee. So my next question is something that terrifies lots of people, and that is, what happens, what should you do if you don't understand the question? Nightmare. What do you do?
Right. It's a great question. And, everyone has this fear like, oh, if I don't understand, they're going to think that, I don't understand English, right? They're going to think my ability isn't very strong. And it's really, I think, exaggerated. A lot of people have this fear, but in reality, it doesn't happen very often. But sometimes it does. So, what I say first is never hesitate to ask the interviewer to repeat the question. To say, I'm so sorry, I didn't quite understand that. Can you repeat that? And I also include some expressions on how to do this in the book. So you ask them to repeat it once. It's no problem. You just continue on normally. Uh, if they repeat the question and you still don't understand, that's where things can get a little tricky, right? So, one thing I always recommend to my clients is to learn how to use the phrase, if I understand you correctly. Because this is a great opportunity where we can take what we do understand and kind of ask for confirmation. So, the interviewer asks a question, and you say, so, if I understand you correctly, you would like to know about the last project I worked on? And that way, if you understood, they'll say, yes, great. If you didn't understand, they'll repeat themselves anyway, right? So I
Excellent.
think this is a good strategy to help you to understand the question.
Yeah, that's a brilliant idea. Just reconfirming that you've understood correctly. And also, I think it's not just a question of you not understanding the question. It's not entirely your fault that you don't understand the question if that person has asked you the question twice. It's also kind of the interviewer's fault. If you can't make yourself understood, if you can't change the way you ask the question so that a foreign speaker can understand you after 2 or 3 attempts, then hey, it's not your fault. Don't feel bad because it's mainly the other person's fault that they can't convey the message a little bit simpler for you after 2 or 3 attempts. I'm sorry, what? If I understood you correctly, blah, 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 right? I mean, they should be able to do that as a native speaker.
That's an excellent point, Greg. And it's something I've talked about recently with a lot of my clients. They say native speakers don't always take responsibility when they consider who they're talking to. And I think that's something that native speakers need to consider more, especially as we move into this more international workplace, right? So hopefully interviewers who work in international companies have learned these skills, whether consciously or unconsciously, they've learned to speak in a way that's a little more clear, use less expressions. But it's not always the case. But yes, it is absolutely communication takes two people at least.
Yeah,
And it's not always the responsibility of the interviewee, of the candidate, to understand everything if the interviewer is not being clear.
excellent. So if the interview isn't being clear or if they're speaking too quickly, is it okay for the candidate to ask the interviewer if they could speak a little bit slower, or does that show weak signs of their English? I mean, they want to give a good impression of their English. If they ask the interviewer to speak more slowly, would that give a negative impression of their English or not? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that particularly is moving into dangerous territory. Is a little dangerous to ask them to speak slower. Um, I think before you resort to that, you try a lot of different strategies before then. So use that expression, if I understand you correctly, or ask them to repeat, or say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Could you can be respectful and ask them to slow down." But I feel like that's a last resort. I feel like you should try to use these other strategies before you ask that.
Okay. Yeah, good. Right then, James, question that most people want to know the answer to is what kind of questions should I be preparing for a job interview in English?
Of course. So yeah, we have those common questions like, tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work here? But really, most questions you can answer using a story. So, in order to be prepared for almost every interview question, you really want to have some stories of your past experience ready. This works for questions like, tell me about your biggest strength. You can say, oh, I'm a great communicator. But if you use a story to illustrate how you are a great communicator, you're really going to leave a good impression on your interviewer. And then, of course, um, it comes in handy when we have these behavioral interview questions that start with, tell me about a time. Tell me about a time that you failed. Tell me about a time you had a challenge in your job. And those questions require a story. But in order to be prepared for any question, you want to have some stories from your past history ready to go.
Okay, so could you just expand on that a little bit when you say tell them a story? I mean, if they say, tell me about yourself, I mean, like what? Once upon a time, there was a little boy called James. I mean, when you talk about telling a story, how much of a story? What do you mean? How can we create a story? Is there a structure that you would recommend to use for this story?
Yeah, of course. So a story can be short, it can be long, right? But it should really help to illustrate the qualities that you want to show in your answer. In order to form a good story, there's a few different methods. We talk about the STAR method, situation, task, action, result, or the CAR method, context, action, result.
Mhm.
But what I always say, don't worry about that as much. Really focus on having a beginning, a middle, and an end. Keep it simple, right? So start by giving some context. Start by telling us this, what is happening the time this story was taking place. And then in the middle, you should really take them through your own actions, your behavior. This is the part where you're illustrating that quality that you want to focus on. And in the star or car method, we have the end is the result. And you really want to tell us the outcome of your actions. You know, if you have the opportunity, use numbers. Something concrete, something we can feel and measure.
Adding numbers to that is brilliant. That's great advice, James. So, with a typical question that they ask in interviews is, and I think it's the one that everybody hates, tell me about your weakness or your biggest weakness or your weaknesses. Now, one question is a question that I heard from a student a while ago. Should I talk about my English if they ask me this question? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a question that most clients will ask me at some point during our interview. And my answer is always the same, and I include this in my book as well. Not quite, right? Don't be general. Don't say, oh, I think my weakness is my English ability, right? Because English, you're not being judged on your English, but English is essential for that job if your interview is in English. So, what do we do instead? I recommend choosing a specific aspect of English. a specific skill in English, and talking about that instead. For example, well, sometimes I get nervous when I have to make a presentation in English. So you're not saying my English is weak, you're saying my presentation skills in English can be a weakness. But no matter what you answer with this question, it's very important at the end of your answer, or use your answer to give concrete steps on how you are improving that skill. It doesn't matter if you say your weakness is something related to English, or if you say your weakness is time management, or whatever you say. When they ask you about your weakness, it's really important to show them, and you can use a story, how you are improving that ability or skill.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Like sometimes when I'm interviewing teachers for Online Language Academy and they talk about a weakness, the end of that question or the end of that answer can go one of two ways. One way is by saying, and I hear this, some people say, yeah, but I should really improve that. I should improve it. I should improve it. All right. So when somebody says that, I think, okay, so probably after the interview, they're going to forget they've said that and not improve it. On the other hand, as you said, if somebody mentions concrete steps that they are taking to improve that, like, yeah, my weakness is my English presentation skills, but I'm currently taking classes and preparing presentations on a weekly basis so that I feel more confident giving interviews in English. Boom, that's brilliant. The interviewer thinks, yes, you've got a weakness, but you are intelligent enough that you have identified it and you're working on it, and it's not going to affect your job because you are constantly improving in that area.
Yeah, and employers really like to see that. A lot of people take this question when they ask about your weakness and they try to say a weakness that's actually a strength, right? And this has become so cliche that interviewers just hate it, right? They say, oh, I think I'm too much of a perfectionist. And you can literally ruin your interview with that one sentence. But because when they ask your weakness, they're not looking for something that is actually a strength. They're not looking for you to hide your weaknesses. They're looking for your ability to reflect on yourself, and they're looking for your ability to show how you work to improve yourself every day. So yes, choose a real weakness, but give us the concrete steps you are taking to improve.
Excellent. Okay, so let's finish the interview, James. But before we do, I just want you to give us your number one tip to make a fantastic impression on the interview so that when you leave the interviewer thinks, yeah, that guy or that girl is the one for the job. What's your number one tip?
Yeah, there's really only one answer, and I've talked about it before. It's having the ability and being ready to tell strong stories. Stories in communication are essential, are absolutely vital. Stories are the way that we connect to other people. Stories are the way that we share human experience. So if you can have strong stories ready in your interviewer, then your interviewer will remember you. We take two candidates side by side. One of them gives very general answers, the other tells stories. 100% of the time, the interviewer will remember the one who told stories. It doesn't matter if the other person is more qualified. It matters who has the ability to connect with the job that they're being hired for, and to connect with the person interviewing them. So if you haven't thought about some stories for your interview, I would start now.
Excellent. I love it. Okay, well, thank you so much for those tips, James. You mentioned your book. Where can we find this book?
Yeah, of course. You can find a copy of my book on Amazon. It is available as a digital book, so you can download it today and start reading today. Or you can order a print copy, which will take a few days to arrive, but is available in most countries.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'll leave a link to James's book in the description to this video. And thanks for your advice. I hope your book is a success. I'm sure it will be with advice like that.
And thank you so much for having me, Greg. It was a pleasure to speak with you about this very important topic. And I hope that anyone watching this finds some value in this video.
And can we find you on social media, James?
Of course, you can follow me on Instagram at English Arrow, and you can also search for me on LinkedIn, and I am happy to connect with you.
Okay, excellent. I'll leave links to everything James has mentioned in the description, and thank you once again. Bye for now, James.